The fluorescent lights in the windowless office hummed their familiar tune as Major Rebecca Mitchell stared at the commendation certificate lying on her desk. For exceptional service in intelligence analysis during Operation Desert Shield. The words blurred slightly as fatigue settled in after 18 straight hours of briefings and debriefings. At 32, Rebecca had learned to find satisfaction in achievements that would never see daylight, in victories that couldn't be shared at dinner parties or family gatherings. The successful neutralization of a terrorist cell in Eastern Europe 3 weeks ago had saved countless lives. But to her family, she was still just Rebecca who works for the military. Her secure phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Chen, her closest friend and fellow intelligence officer. "Heard about the promotion. Drinks to celebrate." Rebecca smiled despite her exhaustion. Amanda was one of the few people who truly understood the weight of their work, the burden of excellence achieved in shadows. Before she could respond, her personal phone rang with a number she recognized all too well. "Hi, Mom. Rebecca, dear." Patricia Mitchell's voice carried its usual mixture of affection and subtle disappointment. "I'm calling about Thanksgiving at Megan's. You're still coming, aren't you?" Rebecca rubbed her temples. 3 days. She had 3 days to mentally prepare for the annual ritual of feeling inadequate. "Yes, I'll be there." "Wonderful. This year will be extra special. Megan just got promoted to Senior Marketing Director, youngest in her firm's history. Ryan closed that resort deal in Bali, and they're announcing their purchase of a vacation home in Aspen." Each achievement landed like a small weight on Rebecca's chest. She glanced again at her commendation, at the medal she'd received last month for preventing an international incident that would remain classified for decades. That's great news," Rebecca managed. "Oh, and bring something nice to wear. Dear, the Carmichaels will be there. You remember James Carmichael from the country club? He's looking for someone to head his company's human resources department. Stable work, good benefits. It might be time to consider your future beyond the military." Rebecca closed her eyes. At 32, she was one of the youngest majors in Special Operations Command, leading a team of analysts whose work directly supported field operations around the globe. Last month, her intelligence had guided a hostage rescue in Yemen. 2 weeks ago, her threat assessment had helped prevent an attack on a U.S. embassy. But to her mother, she was still the daughter who needed career guidance. "I appreciate the thought, Mom, but I'm committed to my current work." "Of course, dear. But let's be realistic. How much advancement can there really be? Megan's already making 6 figures, and she's younger than you." "Younger and making less than my current salary," Rebecca thought but didn't say. Her security clearance came with a salary that would surprise her family, but financial details were as classified as everything else in her life. After hanging up, Rebecca leaned back in her chair and let herself remember the moment 6 years ago when everything changed. She'd been 26, fresh from her master's degree in international relations, working a mind-numbing desk job at her father's friend's consulting firm. Megan was already the golden child with her marketing position, perfect boyfriend, and carefully curated social media presence. The military recruiter's office had been a refuge from family expectations she couldn't meet. Sergeant Williams had seen something in her analytical mind that her family never had, potential for excellence in a field they couldn't understand. Basic training had nearly broken her. But she'd discovered something crucial about herself. She was resilient in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. When her aptitude tests revealed an exceptional capacity for pattern recognition and strategic thinking. Her path toward intelligence work had felt inevitable. The advanced training had been brutal, 18-month programs that pushed her mental and physical limits. But she'd thrived in the environment of high stakes and complex problem-solving. Her first deployment had opened her eyes to the real-world impact of her work intelligence that saved lives. Analysis that prevented conflicts, decisions that shaped international stability. Her phone buzzed again. Amanda. Coffee tomorrow before you head to family torture day, Rebecca typed back. Definitely. Need all the moral support I can get. The promotion ceremony last week had been a small affair. Her commanding officer, her immediate team, and a handful of officials whose names would never appear in public records. Colonel Harrison had shaken her hand and said, "Your work on the Balkan situation was exemplary. Major, the State Department specifically requested you for the next phase." That commendation now sitting on her desk represented the prevention of what could have been a humanitarian crisis. But tomorrow, she'd sit at Megan's perfectly appointed table and let her family assume she was still the underachiever who'd never found her way. Rebecca stood and locked the commendation in her secure filing cabinet, next to 5 years of achievements that would remain invisible to the people whose approval had once meant everything to her. Tomorrow would bring another test of her patience, another reminder of the double life she'd chosen. But tonight, for just a moment, she allowed herself to feel proud of the woman she'd become, even if her family would never know who that really was. 30 miles away in Brookline, Megan Thompson, née Mitchell, stood in her magazine-worthy kitchen, arranging autumn-themed place cards with the precision of a military operation. Everything had to be perfect. It always had to be perfect. The pressure of maintaining her image as the family's golden child had only intensified with each passing year. "The florist delivered the centerpieces," Ryan called from the dining room, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. "Though I still think the orange lilies are a bit much." "They're persimmon-colored, and they match the table runners perfectly," Megan replied, not looking up from her meticulous arrangement. Every detail mattered when you were showcasing success to family and friends. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Johnson & Associates called again about the budget meeting Monday. Seems urgent." Megan's stomach tightened. The marketing firm had been making subtle changes, smaller budgets, reorganized departments, whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the room. Her promotion to senior marketing director had come with increased responsibilities, but also increased scrutiny. The industry was changing, and companies were cutting costs wherever possible. She pushed the anxiety aside and focused on the task at hand. Thanksgiving dinner would be flawless, her success would be evident to everyone present, and her family would continue to see her as the daughter who'd figured it all out. "Mommy, why does Aunt Rebecca always look sad at family dinners?" Madison, her 9-year-old daughter, appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in her carefully selected outfit. Megan paused, considering her response. How to explain the family dynamics that had shaped their lives for decades? Aunt Rebecca made different choices. "Sweetheart, not everyone is suited for challenging careers." "But she's in the Army. That seems challenging." "It's different," Megan said firmly. "She follows orders and does paperwork. It's not the same as building something, creating success for yourself." Even as she said it, something nagged at her. Rebecca had always been quiet, observant. But was she really as directionless as the family assumed? The thought was quickly dismissed. If Rebecca had achieved anything significant, surely she would have mentioned it by now. Ryan wandered into the kitchen, adjusting his cashmere sweater. "Your parents called. They're bringing the Carmichaels, and apparently your mother has some job opportunity she wants to discuss with Rebecca." "Good," Megan said, though she felt a familiar pang of something she couldn't quite name. It's time Rebecca thought seriously about her future. She can't stay in the military forever. "Speaking of futures," Ryan's voice carried a note of concern. "The Pacific Rim deal is solid, but Thompson & Associates is restructuring. There might be some adjustments in the coming months." Megan's hands stilled over the place cards. "What kind of adjustments?" "Nothing to worry about immediately, but we should be prepared for changes. Good thing we closed on the Aspen property when we did." The weight of their mortgage, the private school tuition, the lifestyle they'd built settled on Megan's shoulders. Everything depended on her continued success, her ability to maintain the image of effortless achievement that had become her identity. "Everything will be fine," she said, as much to herself as to Ryan. "Tomorrow's dinner will remind everyone why our family looks up to us. And maybe we can help Rebecca finally get her life on track." As she returned to arranging the perfect Thanksgiving table, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface of their carefully constructed family dynamic. But she pushed the thought away, focusing instead on creating another flawless performance of success. After all, being perfect was what she did best. Rebecca pulled into the circular driveway of Megan's colonial home, her modest Toyota looking distinctly out of place between Ryan's Range Rover and her father's Mercedes. The house looked like something from a lifestyle magazine, perfectly manicured landscaping, tasteful seasonal decorations, and warm light spilling from every window. She sat in her car for a moment, steeling herself for the evening ahead. Through the large front windows, she could see figures moving about, the picture of domestic perfection that Megan had mastered. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca grabbed the bottle of wine she'd brought, a nice vintage, though undoubtedly not as expensive as whatever Ryan had selected for the evening. Megan answered the door before Rebecca had finished climbing the front steps, resplendent in a designer dress that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly rent. "Rebecca, you made it." The smile was genuine but practiced, the tone suggesting mild surprise that Rebecca had actually shown up. Come in. Everyone's here." The house smelled like a perfect Thanksgiving. Roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and something that might have been homemade cranberry sauce. Rebecca handed over the wine and followed Megan into the living room, where the annual cast of characters had assembled. Rebecca, dear, her mother, Patricia, rose from the sofa where she'd been chatting with Helen Carmichael. "You look healthy." That. It was Patricia's code for "you could stand to lose weight." Though Rebecca was in the best shape of her life thanks to military fitness requirements, she accepted her mother's air kiss with practiced grace. "Dr. Mitchell," Rebecca greeted her father, who was deep in conversation with James Carmichael about something involving hospital board politics. He gave her a distracted nod before returning to his discussion about surgical innovations that were making headlines. "Rebecca, Ryan appeared with a tumbler of what looked like expensive scotch. How's military life treating you? Still enjoying the structure?" The way he said structure made it sound like a limitation rather than a strength. "It has its rewards," Rebecca replied evenly. "I'm sure it does. Though I imagine you're thinking about what comes next. Civilian life offers so many opportunities for someone with your experience." And before Rebecca could respond, James Carmichael turned from his conversation with her father. "Ah, Rebecca, Patricia tells me you're in the military. Administrative work, isn't it?" "Something like that," Rebecca said, ignoring the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Excellent training for the private sector," James continued. "Organization, following procedures, attention to detail. I'm always looking for good people in human resources. Stable work, excellent benefits, room for advancement." "How thoughtful of you to consider Rebecca," Megan interjected smoothly. "She's always been so good with details and paperwork." The casual dismissal stung, but Rebecca had learned to armor herself against these moments. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Carmichael, but I'm committed to my current position." Of course, but keep it in mind. Military experience translates well to corporate support roles." Helen Carmichael nodded approvingly. "It's wonderful that you found something that suits your temperament. Dear, not everyone is cut out for high-pressure careers." "Speaking of high pressure," Patricia Mitchell beamed, "Megan, tell everyone about your promotion." And just like that, The conversation shifted to Megan's achievements, the youngest senior director in her firm's history, the innovative campaigns she'd spearheaded, the clients she'd landed. Rebecca listened with a mixture of genuine pride for her sister and familiar resignation at her own invisibility. As the group moved toward the dining room, Rebecca caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror, a woman in her 30s, accomplished in ways she couldn't share, reduced once again to the role of family footnote. The evening was just beginning, and already she could feel the weight of unexpressed truths settling on her shoulders like a familiar, unwelcome coat. The dining room table looked like it had been photographed for Architectural Digest. Crystal glasses caught the warm light from tapered candles. China plates bearing the family monogram gleamed against burgundy table runners, and an elaborate centerpiece of persimmon lilies and autumn foliage ran down the center. Each place setting included a hand-calligraphed name card, and Rebecca noticed hers was positioned strategically between Uncle Steve and Cousin David, safely away from the head of the table where the important conversations would flow. "Please, everyone, find your seats," Megan announced, sweeping into the room with a gravy boat that completed the impressive spread. Turkey, cranberry sauce, 3 different stuffings, roasted vegetables, and dishes Rebecca couldn't even identify covered every available surface. As they settled in, Ryan made a show of pouring wine, making sure to mention the boutique vineyard and vintage year. "This is from our trip to Napa last spring," he said, conspicuously avoiding the bottle Rebecca had brought, which sat unopened on the sideboard. Once everyone was seated, Megan rose for her traditional toast, looking every inch the successful hostess in her designer dress and perfectly styled hair. "I'm so grateful to have our wonderful family gathered here today," she began, raising her crystal goblet. "It's been an incredible year for us. Ryan's Pacific Rim Resort project exceeded all projections. We're looking at expanding to 3 more locations next year." Appreciative murmurs rippled around the table. Rebecca took a sip of wine and reached for a dinner roll, trying to focus on the food rather than the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "The children are thriving at Westmont Academy," Megan continued. "Madison tested into the gifted program, and Ethan's tennis coach says he could compete nationally within 2 years. Exceptional children." Mitchell nodded approvingly. "They take after their mother." "Speaking of taking after their mother," Ryan interjected with pride, "Megan just made senior marketing director, youngest in the firm's 127-year history." The table erupted in congratulations. Patricia Mitchell practically glowed with pride as Helen Carmichael expressed her admiration for Megan's achievement. "And," Megan paused dramatically, "we're excited to announce we've just purchased a vacation home in Aspen. We hope you'll all visit this winter. The skiing is supposed to be exceptional." Rebecca forced a smile and applauded with the others, each announcement feeling like a small weight added to her chest. She glanced around the table at the faces filled with admiration and pride, all directed at Megan. "Oh, and Rebecca." Megan's voice suddenly included her. "You're still with the military, right? How is that going?" All eyes turned to Rebecca. The question seemed innocent enough, but something in Megan's tone made it feel like an afterthought, a polite inquiry about a hobby rather than a career. "It's going well," Rebecca replied, attempting to match her sister's casual tone. "I recently received a promotion. Actually, that's wonderful," Patricia said with the enthusiasm usually reserved for news about Madison's school achievements. "What kind of promotion?" "Dear," before Rebecca could answer, Uncle Steve jumped in. "Military promotions are pretty automatic. Aren't they time in service and all that?" "Not exactly, Pa," Rebecca began. "The important thing is job security," James Carmichael interrupted. "Though you really should consider your long-term prospects. Military experience translates well to administrative roles in the private sector." "Rebecca does very well with following orders and procedures," Megan added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She's always been good at structured environments." The phrase hung in the air with its subtle implications. Good at following orders, structured environments. code for someone who couldn't handle the complexities of real leadership or independent thinking. "What exactly do you do in the military?" Rebecca, David, Megan's cousin-in-law, asked with what seemed like genuine interest. Rebecca felt a flutter of hope. Finally, someone asking about her actual work. "I work in intelligence analysis. It involves intelligence." Ryan laughed. "Sounds very official, like something out of a spy movie. It's actually quite—" Rebecca tried again. "Oh." Rebecca loves to make her work sound mysterious. Megan interrupted with an indulgent smile directed at the table. "She processes reports and data. Very detail-oriented work, which suits her perfectly." Heat rose to Rebecca's cheeks. 6 years of advanced training, classified operations, life and death decisions reduced to processing reports and data. She opened her mouth to correct the record but was cut off again. "The military needs good support staff," Helen Carmichael said with patronizing kindness. "Not everyone can be on the front lines." "Different people, different talents," Dr. Mitchell added sagely. Rebecca always preferred quieter pursuits. Rebecca gripped her wine glass tighter, feeling the familiar burn of frustration mixed with helplessness. How could she explain that her quiet pursuits involved analyzing intelligence that directly supported field operations, that her reports had helped save lives and prevent international incidents, that her promotion to major represented recognition of exceptional performance in one of the military's most demanding fields? But every word she might say would sound like desperate embellishment to people who had already decided what her life looked like. "Well," Megan said, raising her glass again, "here's to family and to everyone finding their place in the world." The toast felt like a closing statement on Rebecca's significance. As glasses clinked around the table, Rebecca stared down at her plate and wondered, not for the first time, why she continued to put herself through this annual ritual of diminishment. The evening was still young, and already she felt herself shrinking back into the role of the family afterthought. The main course proceeded with the usual symphony of Megan's orchestrated success. Every topic of conversation seemed designed to showcase the achievements of everyone except Rebecca. Her father detailed his department's new research grant, her mother shared news of her latest legal victory, and the Carmichaels regaled the table with stories from their recent African safari. Throughout it all, Megan played the perfect moderator, asking just the right questions to highlight each person's accomplishments while deftly steering any attention away from Rebecca. "Uncle Steve, tell everyone about the dealership expansion," Megan prompted during a brief lull. Steve Mitchell beamed as he launched into a detailed account of acquiring 2 more locations, his growing empire of luxury car dealerships, and his plans for regional domination. The table listened with rapt attention, asking questions about market strategy and profit margins. When the conversation finally shifted away from business, Rebecca thought she might find an opening to contribute something meaningful. But instead, the focus turned to travel plans. "We're thinking of doing Greece this summer," Patricia announced. "The Andersons recommended a lovely villa in Santorini." "Oh, you must use our travel agent," Helen Carmichael exclaimed. "She arranged our safari, and everything was absolutely seamless." "Actually," Megan said, her eyes lighting up, "we're planning a family trip to Greece ourselves. We've already booked a villa for 3 weeks in July. Mom and Dad will join us for the middle week." Rebecca felt a familiar sting. This was the first she'd heard of any family vacation plans, though she shouldn't have been surprised. Her unpredictable military schedule made her an inconvenient addition to any plans. "That sounds wonderful," Rebecca said quietly. "The villa has an infinity pool and private beach access," Ryan added. "We're hiring a private chef for the duration." "Some of us have to work during the summer," Rebecca murmured, immediately regretting the comment. Megan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, when you choose a career with advancement opportunities, you earn vacation time. Speaking of which," she turned back to the table with renewed brightness, "who else has exciting travel plans?" The dismissal was so smooth, so practiced, that Rebecca almost admired the skill behind it. Almost. As others shared their upcoming cruises and European getaways, Rebecca retreated further into herself. Her last vacation had been 3 days of leave spent recovering at Amanda's cabin after an intensive operation that had prevented what could have been an international incident. But of course, she couldn't share that. "Rebecca," Patricia suddenly turned to her, perhaps sensing the tension. "You mentioned a promotion earlier. Tell us more about that." For a moment, Rebecca felt grateful for her mother's attempt at inclusion. "Yes, I was recently promoted to more cranberry sauce. Anyone—" Megan stood abruptly, reaching across the table with the crystal serving dish. "I used Mom's recipe, but added orange zest and a touch of bourbon. It's gotten such wonderful reviews." The interruption was seamless, perfectly timed to redirect attention back to Megan's culinary prowess. Rebecca's promotion was lost in a chorus of compliments about the cranberry sauce recipe. "Megan, you really should write a cookbook," Helen Carmichael gushed. "Everything you make is restaurant quality." "Oh, I don't have time for that with work being so demanding," Megan replied with false modesty. "Senior-level positions require complete dedication." The implication hung in the air, unlike some careers that allow for hobbies like cookbook writing. As dessert was served, individual pumpkin tarts with candied pecans and bourbon whipped cream, Megan launched into a detailed account of her department's latest marketing triumph. "We landed the Westfield account," she announced proudly. "It's the largest campaign our firm has handled, and the client specifically requested me to lead it." "That's incredible, darling," Patricia beamed. "What kind of budget are we talking about?" As Megan detailed numbers that made Rebecca's head spin, she couldn't help but think about her own recent landing, identifying and neutralizing a cyber threat that could have compromised military communications across 3 continents. But there would be no press releases about that victory, no champagne toasts, no family pride. "It's all about strategic thinking," Megan concluded, gesturing with her dessert fork. "Seeing the big picture and making bold moves, not everyone has that capacity." "Some people are more comfortable just following orders," Ryan added, glancing meaningfully at Rebecca. Right. Becca. The nickname he knew she hated, combined with the casual dismissal of her capabilities, finally broke through Rebecca's practiced patience. "Actually," Rebecca said, her voice stronger than she'd intended, "my role requires significant independent judgment and critical decision-making." The table fell momentarily silent. Megan's perfectly arched eyebrow rose slightly. "Of course it does, dear," Patricia said soothingly. "All jobs require some level of decision-making. I lead a team that analyzes sensitive information," Rebecca continued, feeling momentum building. "Information that has direct implications for national security operations." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Uncle Steve looked genuinely interested. David appeared confused, and the Carmichaels exchanged glances that suggested they thought Rebecca was overselling her importance. But it was Megan's expression that stung most, a mixture of skepticism and barely concealed annoyance at having her dinner party's flow disrupted. "Rebecca," Megan said with a laugh that sounded forced, "you always were one for dramatics." The words hit like a slap, reducing 6 years of exemplary service and legitimate achievements to childish attention-seeking. Something inside Rebecca finally cracked. "Dramatics," Rebecca repeated, her voice quiet but carrying an edge that made several people at the table shift uncomfortably. Megan's smile flickered. "I just mean, well, you know how you can be, making things sound more important than they really are." "And how important do you think my work really is, Megan?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Megan glanced around the table, clearly wishing she could redirect the conversation back to safer territory. I think I think it's very nice that you found something that suits you, Megan said carefully. Administrative work in the military is certainly respectable. Administrative work, Rebecca repeated flatly. Well, yes, processing paperwork, filing reports, that sort of thing. Very organized, very systematic. It fits your personality. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should— No, Rebecca said, her voice gaining strength. I'd like to hear more about what my family thinks I do for a living. Patricia laughed nervously. Rebecca, dear, there's no need to get upset. I'm not upset, Rebecca said, though her hands were trembling slightly. I'm curious. 6 years in the military, and you all assume I file paperwork. What else do you think about my career? Ryan, apparently thinking he was being helpful, jumped in. Look, Becca, support roles are important too. The military couldn't function without people handling the administrative side. Support roles, Rebecca nodded slowly. Interesting. And my rank, your rank. Megan looked genuinely confused. Yes. What rank do you think I hold after 6 years of service? The table exchanged uncertain glances. Clearly, this was not information any of them had bothered to retain. Sergeant, Uncle Steve ventured. Captain, maybe. Rebecca felt a bitter smile tug at her lips. And my area of specialization. Rebecca, what's gotten into you? Patricia demanded. This is hardly appropriate dinner conversation. Isn't it? Rebecca turned to her mother. My career isn't appropriate dinner conversation, but Megan's marketing campaigns are. That's different, Megan said sharply. My work affects real people, real businesses. It has tangible impact. Tangible impact, Rebecca repeated. Interesting phrase. The tension in the room was palpable now. Madison and Ethan had stopped eating and were watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. Rebecca, Dr. Mitchell said in his authoritative voice, I think you're overreacting to what was clearly meant as what, Dad? As dismissal, as assumption that your younger daughter couldn't possibly have achieved anything significant. Now, that's not fair, Patricia began. Isn't it? Rebecca stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. 6 years, and not one of you has ever asked what I actually do. Not one of you has ever wondered why I can't discuss details of my work. Not one of you has ever considered that maybe, just maybe, I chose a path that led to something meaningful. Rebecca, sit down, Megan hissed. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing myself. Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. By suggesting that I might be more than your family disappointment. Nobody said you were a disappointment, Ryan said, though his tone suggested otherwise. No, you just assumed I was mediocre, Rebecca shot back. All of you. For 6 years, you've patted me on the head like a child playing dress-up in a uniform. Her phone buzzed against her hip, but she ignored it. Rebecca, please, Patricia said, her voice pleading. Let's not ruin Thanksgiving over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Rebecca felt something inside her finally snap. You want to know what's not a misunderstanding. The fact that I've spent 6 years building a career that actually matters, in a field that actually makes a difference, achieving rank and recognition that. Her phone buzzed again, insistently. Then again. Answer your phone, Megan said coldly. Maybe it's someone calling to offer you a real job. Rebecca glanced down at her phone and felt her blood run cold. The number was from her unit's emergency line. 3 missed calls in 2 minutes. She looked up at the table full of family members, staring at her with expressions ranging from concern to annoyance to embarrassment. Excuse me, she said quietly, all the fight suddenly draining out of her. I need to take this." She stepped into the hallway and answered on the fourth ring. "Major Mitchell?" she said automatically. "Major, this is Sergeant Davis. We have a situation developing. Colonel Harrison needs you for an emergency briefing." "When?" "Now, ma'am, I can have a car there in 20 minutes." Rebecca closed her eyes. The one evening she'd finally started to defend herself, and duty called her away from the conversation that was 6 years overdue. "I'll be ready," she said. As she ended the call, she realized the dining room had gone completely silent. Turning, she saw all 9 pairs of eyes staring at her through the doorway, and every single face wore the same expression of shock. They had heard her answer the phone. They had heard Major Mitchell. The secret was out. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Rebecca stood in the hallway, phone still in her hand, looking at 9 faces that had suddenly transformed from dismissive to bewildered. "Major, Dr. Mitchell's voice broke the silence, the word coming out like a question. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, feeling the familiar posture of military bearing settle over her like armor. There was no going back now. "Yes," she said simply. "Major Mitchell," Patricia repeated, as if testing the words in her mouth. "That's correct." Megan's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. "Since when are you a major?" "Since 3 months ago," Rebecca replied, stepping back into the dining room. "The promotion came through in August." "But—" Uncle Steve looked genuinely confused. "Majors are, that's officer level." "High officer level. Yes, it is." Ryan was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "How is that possible? I thought you did administrative work." Rebecca felt a bitter smile tug at her lips. "You thought wrong. But you never said—" Patricia trailed off, clearly struggling to reconcile this information with 6 years of assumptions. "I tried to. Tonight, actually," Rebecca said. "But every time I spoke about my work, it was dismissed or interrupted or reduced to filing paperwork." Megan found her voice, though it came out shaky. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you correct us?" "When?" Rebecca asked. "When you introduced me as Rebecca who works for the military. When you suggested I needed career counseling. When you described my work as following orders and procedures." "We didn't know," Dr. Mitchell began. "You didn't ask." Rebecca cut him off. 6 years? Dad? 6 years. And you never once asked for details about my actual job, my actual rank, my actual achievements. The weight of this revelation was settling over the table like a heavy blanket. James Carmichael, who had spent the evening offering Rebecca entry-level positions, looked like he wanted to disappear. "What do you actually do?" David asked quietly. Rebecca considered her response carefully. Even now, even in this moment of revelation, she couldn't share classified details. "I'm an intelligence analyst," she said. "I lead a team that processes and synthesizes information to support military operations. Most of my work is classified." "Classified," Megan repeated faintly. "Yes, which is why I couldn't discuss details. And why, when you assumed I was doing basic administrative work, I couldn't exactly whip out evidence to the contrary. But Major—" Uncle Steve shook his head in amazement. "That's serious rank. That's serious responsibility." "It is," Rebecca confirmed. "It's also serious security clearance, serious training, and serious impact on real-world operations." The phone in her hand buzzed with a text message. She glanced down. "Car en route? ETA 15 minutes? I have to go," she announced. "There's an emergency briefing I need to attend." "Go." Patricia looked stricken. "But we're in the middle of dinner. We're in the middle of this conversation." "Emergency briefings don't wait for family dinners," Rebecca said, heading toward the guest room to collect her coat. "What kind of emergency?" Ryan called after her, his voice carrying a new note of respect that would have been gratifying under different circumstances. "The classified kind," Rebecca replied from the hallway. When she returned with her coat, the family was still sitting in stunned silence around the table. Megan was staring at her hands. Ryan was staring at Megan, and their parents were staring at Rebecca as if they'd never seen her before. "I need to ask, Doctor," Mitchell said slowly, "has your work been dangerous?" Rebecca paused at the question. How to explain that last month she'd spent 72 hours straight analyzing intelligence that helped prevent a terrorist attack? That her threat assessments had guided operations in 3 different time zones? That the paperwork they'd dismissed so casually had literally saved lives? "Sometimes," she said simply. "Why didn't you tell us?" Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. Rebecca looked around the table one more time, at the faces of people she loved who had spent years unknowingly diminishing her achievements, reducing her to their own comfortable assumptions. "Because," she said quietly, "I learned that it was easier to be underestimated than to constantly defend my choices to people who had already decided what my life looked like." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Headlights swept across the front windows. Her ride had arrived. "I have to go," Rebecca said again. We'll talk about this later." As she headed for the door, Megan's voice stopped her. "Rebecca." She turned back. "I'm sorry," Megan said, her voice small and uncertain. I'm sorry I never really saw you." Rebecca nodded once, then walked out into the cold November night, leaving behind a table full of family members who were finally beginning to understand that they had never really known her at all. The sedan's engine was running, exhaling white vapor into the frigid air. As Rebecca settled into the back seat, she caught a glimpse of faces pressed against the dining room window, watching her drive away. For the first time in 6 years, she felt both completely exposed and completely free. The truth was finally out. Now she had to figure out what came next. Rebecca returned to Megan's house at 11:30 p.m. to find every light still on. Her emergency briefing had lasted 4 hours, a developing situation in Eastern Europe that required immediate intelligence analysis. The kind of work that kept her team operational around the clock. The kind of responsibility that her family had never imagined she carried. She sat in her car for a moment, staring at the house through the windshield. Through the large front windows, she could see figures moving in the living room. They were waiting for her. The front door opened before she reached it. Megan stood there in her stocking feet, her perfect dinner party composure completely gone. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, and her dress wrinkled from what looked like hours of anxious sitting. "Rebecca," she said, her voice uncertain, "you came back. I said I would." Inside, the dinner dishes had been cleared, but the family remained, clustered in the living room like survivors of some natural disaster. "Doctor?" And Patricia Mitchell sat on the sofa. Ryan stood by the fireplace, and Uncle Steve occupied the wingback chair. The Carmichaels had apparently made their excuses and left. "How did it go?" Patricia asked tentatively. "The emergency thing." "It went fine," Rebecca said, settling into the remaining chair. "Crisis averted." "What kind of crisis?" "Doctor—" Mitchell leaned forward, with an intensity Rebecca had rarely seen directed at her. She considered her response. "The kind I can't discuss in detail. Intelligence matters involving potential threats to American interests overseas." The weight of those words settled over the room. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was their daughter, their sister, dealing with real international crises at 11:30 on a Thursday night. "Rebecca," Patricia's voice was small, We need to understand. Help us understand what your life actually looks like. For the first time in 6 years, Rebecca felt like they were genuinely asking. Not dismissing, not assuming, but actually wanting to know. I'm a major in Army intelligence, she began. I've been promoted twice ahead of schedule based on performance evaluations. I hold a top-secret security clearance and lead a team of 12 analysts who process information from multiple intelligence sources. She paused, watching their faces process this information. My work involves threat assessment, operational planning support, and real-time intelligence synthesis for field operations. The briefing tonight involved a developing situation that could have escalated into a significant security threat if not properly managed. Security threat, Ryan repeated, his earlier condescension completely absent. Yes, the kind that makes international headlines when it goes wrong, and never makes the news when it goes right. And you've been doing this for 6 years, Dr. Mitchell asked. Building up to it for 6 years. The advanced training alone took 2 years. The security clearance process was another 8 months of background investigation. Megan, who had been silent since letting Rebecca in, finally spoke. Why didn't you tell us? Really tell us? Rebecca looked at her sister, really looked at her. For the first time, she saw past the perfect exterior to something vulnerable underneath. At first, because most of it was classified, and I was still learning what I could and couldn't share, Rebecca said honestly. But later, because it became clear that the family narrative was firmly established, I was the underachiever. You were the star. Anything that contradicted that story made everyone uncomfortable. Including you, Megan asked perceptively. Rebecca nodded slowly. Including me. It was easier in some ways to be underestimated. No pressure to live up to impossible standards, no expectations to maintain a perfect image. The accusation hung unspoken in the air. Patricia cleared her throat uncomfortably. We're proud of you, she said, though it sounded uncertain, like she was trying on new clothes that didn't quite fit yet. Are you? Rebecca asked quietly. Or are you just shocked? The question lingered without an answer. Pride, Rebecca realized, would have to be earned over time, not through dramatic revelations, but through the slow work of rebuilding relationships based on who she actually was rather than who they had assumed her to be. I think, she said, standing up. We all need time to process this. It's been a long evening. As she headed toward the door, Uncle Steve called out, Rebecca! She turned back. For what it's worth, he said. I'm impressed as hell. Major at 32, leading intelligence operations. That's exceptional. Thank you, she said simply. Outside in the cold November air, Rebecca felt strangely empty. The secret was out. The truth had been told. But somehow the victory felt hollow. She had spent years imagining this moment of recognition, but now that it had arrived, it felt less like triumph and more like exhaustion. The real work of rebuilding relationships, she realized, was just beginning. 3 days later, Rebecca's phone rang at 7 a.m. Rebecca, dear. Patricia's voice was bright with a forced enthusiasm that immediately put Rebecca on guard. I was just telling Dr. Henderson about your promotion. You know, Dr. Henderson from the hospital board. His son works for the Pentagon, and he'd love to meet you. Rebecca rubbed her temples. Since Thanksgiving, her phone had been ringing constantly. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about her career, her clearance level, her important work. The family that had ignored her achievements for 6 years was now obsessed with them. Mom, I'm not looking to network right now. Oh, but you should, Dr. Henderson says there are excellent opportunities for someone with your background in the private sector. Defense contracting pays extremely well, and I'm happy with my current position. Of course you are, dear, but you should always keep your options open. Someone with your importance should be thinking strategically about the future. Your importance. 3 months ago, she had been Rebecca who worked for the military. Now she was Rebecca, who had importance. The whiplash was dizzying. After hanging up, Rebecca drove to work thinking about how quickly everything had changed and how uncomfortable that change felt. At her security briefing that morning, her commanding officer pulled her aside. "Mitchell, everything all right? You seem distracted lately." "Family adjustment period. Sir, nothing that affects my work." "Good. Because the intel you provided on the Belgrade situation was exceptional. The State Department specifically requested you for the next phase of operations. And the commendation should have felt satisfying. But Rebecca found herself thinking instead about Megan, who hadn't called once since Thanksgiving. That afternoon, she decided to drive to Megan's office. The sleek downtown building housed one of Boston's premier marketing firms, and Rebecca had always been impressed by the modern lobby with its abstract art and expensive furniture. But when she asked for Megan Thompson at the reception desk, the young woman's expression grew uncertain. "I'm sorry. Ms. Thompson is in meetings all day. Would you like to leave a message? I'm her sister. It's important." 20 minutes later, Megan appeared in the lobby looking harried and pale. She wore her professional armor, designer suit, perfect makeup, confident posture, but something was off. "Rebecca, what are you doing here? We need to talk." They found a quiet corner in the lobby cafe. Megan ordered black coffee with shaking hands. "I've been calling you," Rebecca said. "I know. I've been busy." "With what?" Megan's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. "With trying to save my job," she whispered. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "What? The firm is restructuring. They're eliminating positions, consolidating departments. The Westfield account I was so proud of. The client pulled out last week due to budget constraints." "Megan, they called it a right-sizing initiative," Megan continued, her voice bitter. 15 people got laid off on Monday. I survived this round, but my position is being evaluated for redundancy." Rebecca stared at her sister, seeing clearly for the first time the toll that maintaining perfection had taken. "How long have you known?" "The rumors started a month ago. I've been working 16-hour days, trying to prove my indispensability, trying to—" Megan's voice broke. "Trying to stay valuable enough to keep—" "Why didn't you tell the family?" Megan laughed harshly. "Tell them what? That the golden child might lose her perfect job, that the success story they've been bragging about for years is falling apart. They're your family. They would support you." "Would they?" Megan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Or would they just shift all their attention to their newly discovered successful daughter?" The accusation hung between them. Rebecca realized with a start that her sister was right. Since Thanksgiving, their parents had been calling her constantly while barely mentioning Megan. "I spent 35 years being the perfect daughter," Megan continued. "The achiever, the success story, the one who made them proud. And you know what I discovered? It's exhausting. It's terrifying. Because the moment you stop being perfect, the moment you need help instead of providing it, She trailed off, but Rebecca understood. "You think they'll abandon you? I think they'll do what they always do, focus on whoever is winning at the moment." Rebecca felt a surge of anger at their parents, followed immediately by guilt. Hadn't she wanted this recognition for years? Hadn't she resented Megan's position as the family favorite, for what it's worth? Rebecca said quietly, "I never wanted to replace you. I just wanted to be seen." Megan wiped her eyes carefully, trying to preserve her makeup. "I know. And I'm sorry it took me so long to really see you. But Rebecca," she looked directly at her sister, "I'm scared. I don't know who I am if I'm not the successful one." The vulnerability in Megan's voice was like nothing Rebecca had ever heard from her sister. For the first time, she saw past the perfect exterior to the frightened woman underneath who had built her entire identity on external achievement. "You're my sister," Rebecca said simply. "That's enough." But even as she said it, she knew that rebuilding their relationship would require more than platitudes. They had both spent too many years trapped in roles that no longer served them. The question was whether they could find a way forward that honored who they actually were rather than who their family expected them to be. 2 weeks later, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Megan at 6 a.m. "It happened. Can you come over?" Rebecca found her sister sitting in her pristine kitchen, still in her pajamas, at 10 in the morning. Coffee grew cold in an untouched mug while Megan stared at a letter from her company's HR department. "Effective immediately," Megan said without looking up. "Position eliminated due to restructuring. Severance package, benefits continuation, glowing recommendation letter. Very professional termination." Rebecca sat down across from her. "I'm sorry." 12 years, Megan said quietly. 12 years of 60-hour weeks, missed dinners with the kids, canceled vacations because of client emergencies, and it all ends with a form letter. "What did Ryan say?" "Ryan's in crisis mode, calculating mortgage payments, private school tuition, the Aspen house." Megan laughed bitterly. "Turns out our perfect life was more leveraged than I realized." Rebecca studied her sister's face. Without makeup, with her hair uncombed and wearing old pajamas, Megan looked younger somehow, more real. "What are you going to tell Mom and Dad?" "I don't know." Megan's voice was small. "For 35 years, I've been their success story. How do I tell them I failed?" "You didn't fail," Rebecca said firmly. "You got caught in corporate restructuring. That's not failure. That's economics." "Tell that to the family narrative." Rebecca stood and moved to the coffee maker. Maybe it's time to change the family narrative. As she prepared fresh coffee, she thought about the past 2 weeks, the constant phone calls from relatives wanting to hear about her important work, the way conversations now stopped when she entered rooms, the new weight of expectations she didn't want. "Megan," she said, returning to the table with 2 steaming mugs. "I have a confession. The past 2 weeks have been horrible." Megan looked up, confused. "Everyone's suddenly fascinated by my career. Mom calls daily with networking opportunities. Dad wants to introduce me to his colleagues. Uncle Steve asked if I could get his grandson into West Point." Rebecca sat down heavily. "I spent 6 years wanting recognition, and now that I have it, I hate it. Why? Because it's not really about me. It's about my rank, my clearance, my perceived importance. Just like their admiration for you was never really about you. It was about your title, your salary, your house." Megan considered this, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "So we're both trapped by their expectations." "We're trapped," Rebecca corrected. "This could be our chance to break free." "How?" Rebecca leaned forward. "By supporting each other instead of competing, by defining success on our own terms instead of theirs." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of years of misunderstanding settling between them. "I have another confession," Megan said finally. "I was jealous of you." "Of me?" Rebecca couldn't hide her surprise. "Of your freedom, your sense of purpose. You do work that actually matters, that actually makes a difference in the world. I sell luxury products to people who already have everything they need. But you're good at it. You built something. I built a career. You found a calling. There's a difference." Rebecca reached across the table and took her sister's hand. "So what do we do now?" "I think," Megan said slowly, "we start being honest with our parents, with each other, with ourselves." "That sounds terrifying." "It is." but maybe it's time to stop performing perfection for people who love us anyway. 2 hours later, they sat on the couch in Megan's living room, Ryan having taken the children to school and left for a client meeting. Patricia and Dr. Mitchell sat across from them, summoned for an important family discussion. "Mom, Dad," Megan began, her voice steadier than Rebecca had expected. "I lost my job yesterday." The silence that followed was deafening. "But more importantly," Megan continued, "I've been unhappy for years, trying to live up to expectations that were impossible to maintain." Patricia started to speak, but Rebecca cut her off gently. "And I've been hiding who I really am, because I was afraid you wouldn't value me, unless I fit into the role you'd assigned me." Mitchell looked between his daughters with something approaching bewilderment. "What are you saying?" "We're saying," Rebecca said, "that we want to have real relationships with you. Not performances, not competitions, just family." It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were tears, awkward silences, and moments of defensive justification from their parents. But it was honest in a way their family discussions had never been before. 3 months later, Rebecca sat in her apartment reading a text from Megan. "Job interview tomorrow. Nonprofit this time. Pays half what I made before, but the mission actually means something. Wish me luck." She typed back, "You don't need luck. You need to be yourself. That's enough." Outside her window, spring was beginning to show itself in small buds on the trees. Change, Rebecca had learned, came slowly and imperfectly, but it did come. For the first time in years, she was looking forward to next Thanksgiving.